Hello and welcome back to this damn full idealistic crusade. This video is a review of the beautiful 4K restoration of the landmark The Hunchback of Notre Dame, a Universal Super Jewel film which was not only a silent epic, but is one of the important stepping stones and arguably one of, if not their first quasi-horror film. And this is the release by the Eureka Masters of Cinema label. That is the same restoration master that I have previously reviewed on the Kino Lorber release. So it is the same restoration on both, but I do think the Eureka is the significantly improved package overall and the better release to go for if you're trying to decide between the two versions. Now, this is the absolutely breathtaking, stunning restoration of the film that I have discussed before, and if you want to hear more of my overall general thoughts on the film and the restoration, I do suggest you look at my review of the Kino release because it is the same restoration here, so that hasn't changed. As for the film itself, just some general thoughts. This is still one of the incredible treasures of the silent screen. This is a great film to have people get introduced to silent cinema with, and it is one of the important horror precursors, even though it's not a horror film, and it is trying to do Victor Hugo's novel, but of course with many concessions to the production being done in 1923 and significantly altering the rather sprawling novel and also some of the characters significantly to, the constraints and the censorship of the time in the 1920s. Even though this is still obviously before the production code, there were many things done in the adaptation process to make it more palatable for both audiences and censors at the time. So it's not a beat-for-beat adaptation of Hugo's novel, which I don't know if any version has ever really done that, because it would be a very long and sprawling film. But this also, formed a lot of the general idea of the Hunchback story in a lot of the public's mind, and that has sort of permeated itself into pop culture. And this would get a bit furthered with the 1939 remake that RKO did, which when you're looking at Hunchback versions, and the extras on this release do get into some of the adaptations, but there are really only two film versions of The Hunchback of Notre Dame that really stand the test of time, and are the ones people judge all the others by. It is this 1923 silent masterpiece and the masterful RKO version, the 1939 version with Charles Laughton and Maureen O'Hara that was directed by William Dieterle, which I do need to pick up the Blu-ray of. That's a standard Warner Blu-ray I've been meaning to pick up for some time. But it's because the 1939 version does adhere quite closely in a lot of ways to the adaptation here in the 1923 version, that makes the comparisons all the more obvious, and it helped to solidify a lot of the things that the 1923 version did in the sort of pop culture view of the Hunchback story, much as a lot of classic horror stories were first adapted into stage plays, and the stage plays became the sort of version that a lot of people knew of, and then it was the stage plays that were adapted into some of the first silent and sound films, such as Dracula and Frankenstein by Universal in 1931, and that jump-started the golden age of Universal horror. So there's a history of stories being sort of not necessarily watered down, but obviously to some degree, but also adapted and changed a bit, and that becoming the sort of version of standard that people think of. But to look at Hunchback here, this is, as I said before, what was termed a Universal Super Jewel production. That was the name given to the biggest, most mammoth, epic productions they could possibly do, and Hunchback was no exception. This was one of, if not the last film that Irving Thalberg, the boy genius of Hollywood, had anything to do with, and this was Universal swinging for the fences, and had it not worked, they would have been in real trouble, as they frequently were, needing big films to, or big successes to save them from bankruptcy. So this was a smaller studio swinging for the fences with a massive production scale. In fact, the reproduction of the Parisian city square and the Notre Dame Cathedral was so extensive and massive that not only could you see it from for miles around, but it was kept and reused time and time again. So you will see the steps, for example, of the Notre Dame Cathedral pop up in innumerable Universal productions, including other Universal horror films. So in that sense, it's sort of the first version of the famous Phantom of the Opera stage that was reused time and time again until it was unfortunately torn down only a few years ago, which was a great loss to film history. For my money, this is still the best film version of The Hunchback of Notre Dame. No, it's not exactly Hugo's novel, obviously. Yes, there were many changes made, but I think its only rival is the 1939 version. I think each has their own strengths, but this one just has such a sense of atmosphere and a sense of drive to it, even though it makes substantial changes to the original book, that I find it hard to pick between the two, but this one always edges out as my personal favorite, and especially since this breathtaking restoration was done a number of years ago. This is a 4K restoration, and what's so special and important about this is, of course, Hunchback was almost entirely lost. The only surviving versions we have are the 16mm reduction prints made for the Universal Show at Home program, which was essentially the first home video program that ever existed. So these were reduction 16mm prints of varying quality made of a particular version of the film. So this is not unfortunately the complete Roadshow original release version. This is a 16mm source, which is the best that survives, of the Show at Home home video edition that was made from the general release slightly cut version, as would be common throughout all of film history with big Roadshow films. When they went to make the general release for the smaller towns that would get it months to perhaps a year later, they would make significant cuts and trims to get the runtime down, and thus the actual print manufacturing costs and shipping costs and everything would be cheaper. So the version we have that survives is thought to be about 10 to perhaps more like 20 minutes shy of the original release version. And of course, with silent films having different frame speeds and different releases and restorations running at different speeds themselves, that's going to vary somewhat. But from what we can tell, there seems to be about 20 minutes of some scattered scenes and sequences that we have stills and evidence of that is unfortunately not here. So this is still one of the silent classics that we have to hold out hope that some of that material might turn up in a vault somewhere, just like Metropolis did. So if it can happen for Metropolis, it could possibly happen for Hunchback, so we can keep that hope alive. But this restoration really worked miracles with the surviving 16mm source. All you have to do is see any of the older versions or horrible public domain versions of this film, or if you've seen this film at any point in the years before this restoration, and then you come to this, it's beyond night and day. This is a resuscitation, a miraculous restoration of a silent classic. So if you've seen this film before and you haven't seen this restoration, you've never seen it like this. And if you've never seen this film before, this is the perfect time to see this, because this will just bowl you over, even though it's still limited to only working from the Show at Home, slightly trimmed 16mm version. There is a wonderful usage of very well done color tinting that is kept to a very tasteful usage of the usual sort of blues for the night sequences, and then a general sort of kind of like the golden amber, a slight almost sepia tone quality to all of the daylight sequences. And it's very well done, and it fits beautifully with the restoration of the actual 16mm material. So that is beautifully done, as I talked about, because it's the same presentation on the previous Kino release. So that hasn't changed. But for those who have not seen this restoration, you are missing out, because this is one of the most miraculous silent film restorations I've ever seen for pulling such quality out of such a limited single source, because again, this is literally all we have for this film. And additionally, the new score that was composed for this is really well done, and it's the same score that was on the Kino, so it's tied to this particular restoration. So this is a perfect gateway silent restoration for people who have never never really gotten into silent films or looking to experience some more silent classics, but you're looking for the best version or a silent classic that now has a really great restoration, well, that's what you get here in the 4K restoration of the Hunchback of Notre Dame. Now, as far as why this film is important, not only is it a Universal super jewel, not only is it Universal swinging for the fences and going way beyond their means, and not only is it very well made. It was directed by Wallace Worsley, who doesn't get a lot of credit, but I think he does quite a good job at marshaling all of these massive crowd scenes and all of the character drama together, because of course, any version of Hunchback, you have tons of different characters. I think it's quite well cast for the rest of the cast and the supporting players. And then a really beautiful Esmeralda here, played by Patsy Ruth Miller, who really matches the sort of different rendering of Esmeralda very well. So I think alongside Maureen O'Hara's Esmeralda in the 1939 RKO version, she's probably my favorite Esmeralda of the film versions I've seen, even though here it's a version of the character that's cast much more in the sort of with all the other characters sort of lusting after her or desiring her in this story, with her being so young and seemingly innocent, it's very much an Esmeralda that's more desired for being a sort of figure of purity or innocence or youth. So it's that type of iteration of Esmeralda, as opposed to other versions having much more of an obvious sensual connotation to it. So that's a perfectly fine take on it. That's just how this film does it. But everything in this film is secondary to the real draw and what links this film forever with Universal horror as a sort of building block or precursor to the golden age of Universal horror that would start in 1931. And that is, of course, Lon Chaney Sr.'s absolutely towering, mesmerizing, life-changing performance as Quasimodo. This is probably the signature role that forever solidified him as the sort of proto-horror star and the man of 1,000 faces. This is one of his legendary performances and is, along with Eric in The Phantom of the Opera, probably his most legendary. Words cannot even begin to describe the depth of his performance for those who have never seen not only this film, but who have never seen Chaney in action before. And this was even a giant leap forward over his other performances that we can see that survive, because unfortunately so many are painfully lost. You can see his commitment to craft and how he would really cause himself physical harm just to play the role in other films such as The Penalty. But here, and as Quasimodo, he took that to an even greater level. So knowing any bit about the production and what Chaney went through and what he put himself through with the very intensive makeup and what he did to his eye to make it seem deformed, just the sheer physical aspects of having to bind himself into braces to give himself a deformed walk, and to the weight of the actual hump that he wore to create the hunchbacked effect, along with the brace and then the body hair and the body makeup that he did. It's just such a level of commitment to a role that is beyond what 99.9% of other performers or actors are going to do. And this is one of the legendary cinematic performances where you do have to always have that in mind, or at least afterwards. This is one of those performances where the performer has gone to such physical lengths to get to this level that it can't help but feed into the performance. And the performance itself, oh my word, even if you knew nothing about Chaney or what he did to achieve the physical performance and what he did to himself physically, and how he actually debilitated himself and wound up having problems with his own physical health for years after this, pretty much up until he died only a short while later, unfortunately. But even if you didn't know anything about that, the emotional complexity, the nuance, the depths of every single frame that he is in this film. I mean, it is his film, even though Quasimodo isn't the main character of The Hunchback of Notre Dame, although it's named after him. Quasimodo is the main character of this film, and it's this film being so successful and putting that in people's minds that sort of shifted the focus away from most adaptations being about Esmeralda instead of Quasimodo. This is what sort of shifted that paradigm to make all further Hunchback versions about Quasimodo. But it's not a role that any actor can just easily say, "Oh, I'm going to play Quasimodo," because you're following in Chaney's footsteps, and that's just something that no actor wants to put themselves in, because that's a lot of weight on your shoulders. Because quite frankly, Chaney here as Quasimodo is so indescribably to even begin to call his performance pitch perfect is, it could literally be the definition of the term pitch perfect, because it is such a complete and total performance that it is still, to this day, one of the greatest performances, I think, in the entire cinematic medium. And that's not me going, being just a giant Chaney fan and classic horror fan, or just a silent movie nerd. It is such a striking performance that it forever altered the conception of playing Quasimodo. Even Charles Laughton had to wrestle with that in 1939 and acknowledge so. He had to find a different way to play it, but still, you're following in Chaney's footsteps. You can't get around this. And it's such an unbelievably heartbreaking and emotionally investing performance that you can't tear your eyes from the screen. Even if you don't like silent films, this is one of those that is a perfect gateway for people, especially for kids who have never seen a silent film. You can show them this, and from Chaney's first appearance in the first couple minutes, I mean, you are just transported into another world. And the fact that the rest of the film is so well made enough to support Chaney's performance, this makes it an overall better film experience than The Phantom of the Opera, which doesn't have that same level of strong support around Chaney's performance. That film didn't have as good of a director and went through a multitude of different cuts, and there was a lot of other stuff going on in the production that always means it's never quite as effective or lives up to Chaney's performance. So it's Chaney and the atmosphere and the accoutrements of the story that make it a cinematic legend and forever fascinating and something you return to time and time again. Well, you don't have that problem here in Hunchback, because the rest of the film at least rises to the occasion, I think, and it remains, for me, probably the best film version of The Hunchback of Notre Dame, in spite of making changes and things. But make no mistake, this is Lon Chaney's film. This is the Quasimodo for the ages, and one of the best performances you'll ever see in your life. And I cannot stress that enough for those who have not seen this. To see Chaney's Quasimodo just in the opening, his mannerisms that he gives Quasimodo that are completely unique, right down to the way that how he uses his tongue with these incredibly deformed and misshapen and cracked teeth that he's given this Quasimodo, and then his physicality, and when in the opening sequence when he's jeering at the Festival of Fools below, he starts literally climbing the walls of the cathedral like a human fly, and his physicality, even in doing that, you can't tear your eyes away from the screen, and that lasts through the entire film, and it remains not only a performance for the ages, but a performance that has never been matched. Arguably the only one, I think, that has really come close is Charles Laughton in the 1939 version, but that's because he had to find a different way of playing it, and of course he had the benefit of it being a sound film. And there have been some other versions over the years that I've seen that had good Quasimodos, but it's only when they find their own method of approaching the character that puts a unique stamp on it, or has at least something there that's bringing something new to the table. But still, everybody's following in the shadow of Lon Chaney in this film. You're never going to get away from that. So to be able to see Chaney's absolutely legendary performance here in such a marvelous quality that we never dreamed, or at least I certainly never dreamed would be available. That makes this all the more precious and special. This is one of the best silent film restorations we've yet seen, and short of a miraculous discovery of a 35mm source, this is the best it's ever going to be. And the fact that they were able to pull out this much quality and detail out of this source will never cease to amaze me. So this is one of the absolutely essential must-see silent film restorations of the digital era, and particularly of where we are now in the 4K realm. So then to turn to the Eureka Masters of Cinema release, this is a Region B affair, so you will need region-free capability, which is relatively easy to do nowadays. It's not as convoluted and complicated as it used to be, and also their prices are rather affordable. So it's a pretty equivalent cost to what you're looking at for the Kino release. The restoration is the same, so it is the same exact source that Kino put out on their release. So you're basically looking at the two different versions in terms of the supplements, the artwork, and then the differences in the actual encoding and handling of this 4K restoration. So as I said on my review of the Kino release, that is a rather impressive disc for them, and they did a very good job at putting this new 4K restoration on their disc with a solid commentary by Farron Smith-Neme, and also some nice little exclusive extras and little fascinating bits of home movie footage of Lon Chaney Sr. So that's what makes that disc still important and nice to have, just for that commentary and those specific extras. Plus it had a pretty nice booklet which reproduced the original souvenir program. However, here on the Eureka release, we do have so many incredible supplements and beautiful artwork, and on top of that, a better encoding of the master itself, that I do think the Eureka is the superior version on disc. So if you have not picked up either version and you were curious about which you should go for, I think it's unquestionably the Eureka version. So here on the limited Masters of Cinema release, we have their usage of a slipcover with the absolutely gorgeous rendering of original poster artwork. This is an absolutely stunning slipcover. This is one of the best slipcovers I've seen in years, and it's absolutely fantastic. Unfortunately, the limited version has sold out, but with Eureka releases, the limited editions of their standard standalone releases like this, it's basically just the slipcover that you're losing out on. And unfortunately, in this case, this one is so well done that it's kind of unfortunate that they couldn't just keep making the slipcovers. So unfortunately, you can't get the slipcover anymore, or you have to turn to eBay or the used market and pay the usual out-of-print markup. So I've missed out on some before. I missed out on the slipcover for The Man Who Laughs, for example, but the actual disc contents and the actual case is identical to what you get in the standard version, which also retains the booklet as well. So basically, all you're missing out on is the, unfortunately, very beautiful slipcase. So that is the difference between the limited and standard versions. Then here's the spine. This is spine number 270. And then the rear gives us some more nice imagery, this green background, and then the list of supplements. So when you take this off, you get the actual case, which uses a version of the original artwork depicting the famous moment of Quasimodo being given water by Esmeralda after being whipped brutally. And this is also seemingly from original, I guess it's from perhaps lobby card materials or some sort of promotional materials, because it has the very striking usage of tinted color, as they would always do on promotional materials. So I really like that Eureka went with this, because it's actual original artwork, just like the slipcover, and it looks really striking on here. So when you go to pick up the standard edition now, it's going to be this that you're getting on the cover. So basically, all you lose from the limited version is the slipcover. And here's the interior with the disc label. What I absolutely love about this is that they used one of the best higher resolution production photos that exists. But I've seen this photo before, and I've always really liked it because it's rare. You get a lot of silent film crew materials where you see the camera setups and everything, and you see everybody in production mode. But I love that they used that here for the image under the disc tray. Then we get a wonderful booklet with loads of beautiful imagery. We get a beautiful new essay by Philip Kemp, which is nice and very substantial. But then if you were worried about losing out on the reproduction of the original souvenir program, after the essay ends, which has lots of nice images throughout, Eureka has actually done a full reproduction as well. So you don't have to worry about missing out on this because it is here in its entirety, nicely printed, and then each of the pages, if you notice, they're sized just right to where you get the full actual original page, but they made sure to not actually cut anything off. And then, of course, we have some of the original release poster artwork, and then the typical Eureka credits. What I really love about this as well is they have the wonderful on-set photo of the director with Carl Laemmle and Lon Chaney in full makeup with the crown of fools on. What I also love is that the exterior of the booklet is framed with Chaney's Quasimodo and then a lovely shot of Patsy Ruth Miller's Esmeralda. So I like that they've done that effect. And then here is the rear of the standard edition with the supplements listed. So to go over the special features here, and all of these are exclusive to the Eureka version. So this is where you really have to compare and contrast with the Kino to see which floats your boat more. Here we have the Blu-ray presentation from the Universal 4K restoration with the new score by Nora Kroll Rosenbaum and Laura Karpman, which is presented in lossless PCM stereo. We have the brand new audio commentary with the sort of double act we're used to on a lot of these releases, which is Stephen Jones and Kim Newman. Just like all of their other tracks, this is a really great must-listen track with a really lively discussion of the film. They talk about all kinds of the various adaptations over the years and how they compare to the 23 version and how the 23 version kind of instigated a lot of the ideas that sort of got accepted as what's in the popular consciousness. They talk about Chaney's performance. They talk about the production. They talk about getting the production together because that whole story is, kind of a little convoluted and gets reported in different ways over the years. They talk especially about how Chaney did have quite a lot of creative control here and essentially acted as a producer, at least uncredited. He didn't have a credit as producer or co-director or anything, but he had so much input on this that he was very much a star producer here. It's a great commentary. It's well done, as are all of theirs. So if you've heard one of the commentaries by Kim Newman and Stephen Jones, you know what to expect. So this is another great track in their series of great discussion tracks. And because it's pretty lively and easy to listen to, and it plays along with the film well, and you've got two people talking, and there's so much to go over. I do think it is a better commentary than the Neme commentary on the Kino disc, but that's also a great commentary. So, it just helps that this one is a bit livelier, a bit more energetic, and it's always easier when you have two people talking as opposed to having to do a solo commentary on your own. I myself know for a fact how difficult those are because I've made quite a number of them myself, and it's a very nerve-wracking affair, let me tell you. So my hat's off to anyone who does a good commentary, especially on their own. But when you're comparing the two, if you were to trying to decide between the two releases, I do think the commentary here is a bit livelier, and it's just so jam-packed with information that while it would be great to have both commentaries on the same release, you do get a fantastic commentary on the Eureka if you choose to go with this versus the Kino. But that's not all. We get a brand new interview with Kim Newman in another of his essential, fascinating, wonderful to watch, lengthy discussion pieces where he specifically talks about all the different adaptations for both film and television and beyond of Hunchback of Notre Dame. So if you like those sections of the commentary, here he just goes to town for another of his nice lengthy discussion pieces about all the different versions that he's gone through and cobbled together this piece of. So if you ever wanted a crash course in the different versions of The Hunchback of Notre Dame on for film and television especially, this is exactly what you were looking for. And it's really helpful because this is one of those stories that's been done so many times, and different adaptations take different approaches, and the pop culture view of the story is very different to the original source novel. It's really helpful to have discussion of the different adaptations and the source novel from somebody who's gone through all of these and then lays it out in a sort of historical progression. So this is an essential extra, and just like all of these Kim Newman pieces, very well done and very recommended, and another reason why this release I think is better than the Kino edition. But we have one more video extra, which is a substantial lengthy interview with another famous name or notable name that you should expect on especially classic horror releases. So this is a piece with the great Jonathan Rigby. So if you wondered if any of the other horror historians might show up here, well, Jonathan Rigby here has a wonderful lengthy interview piece on the film and Chaney and its place in the universal horror canon if you want to link it. So this is another great lengthy, wonderfully informative piece on just really the whole world of the 1923 version of The Hunchback of Notre Dame, and just like all of his pieces done for physical media releases on different films, it's absolutely fantastic and a must-watch, and you'll probably revisit all of these extras every time you rewatch the film. And all of this added together, I think, makes a much more comprehensive and certainly a longer extras package than what you get on the Kino release, which again just has the really good commentary and then the really priceless home movie footage of Lon Chaney and some footage of the actual Hunchback set. So it would have been great had we been able to get this Eureka release also have the Kino extras, which obviously they couldn't license, so I understand that. So it's nice to have both, to have all of the extras, but if you were to just get one, it has to be the Eureka release. It is the more comprehensive release. It has the better supplements package, which is significantly more substantial in both being more comprehensive and the scope of the information that it's covering, but also it is significantly longer because you have two lengthy video interviews in addition to the new feature-length commentary. And then, of course, this also has the really lovely booklet essay by Philip Kemp and also reproduces the original souvenir program like the Kino release did. So when you compare the two, I think the Eureka has the much more significant supplements package. So to give an overall summary, I think this is an absolutely stunning MOC release. I think it's one of the best Masters of Cinema discs out there. I think this is a must-own. I think this is a must-upgrade for sure. If you don't have a version of the 4K restoration, this is an absolute must, even if you're not a fan of silent films or you're not into classic horror films. This is still so incredibly important and such a beautiful film. And then Chaney's performance alone will... it still has the power to reduce people to just a mess of bubbling tears and things, particularly by the end. It is still, without question, one of the great performances of the cinematic medium. That is not an understatement. It is that genuinely affecting literally now 100 years after the fact. And to be able to see this film at this level of quality that we almost lost 100 years later, and it still is just as powerful and impactful and effective, even though we're having to look at a 16mm show-at-home reduction edition print of the cut-down general release version, so we're still missing about 20 minutes, it's still genuinely moving, and for me, still the best film version of The Hunchback of Notre Dame. And of the two releases, even though the Kino release is well done and I think probably their best silent film release on Blu-ray, particularly because the master is so great, and it also doesn't have any encoding problems or some sort of error crop up like their terrible Blu-ray of Nosferatu, which was ruined by some errors. I think it's Kino's best silent film Blu-ray release to date. But that said, even though it has a really nice commentary and it has that wonderful, priceless, candid footage of Lon Chaney Sr., it's not as good as the Eureka edition, which also has the benefit, like most of their releases compared to US boutique labels, it's also better encoded. So there is no downside to the Eureka edition. If you have enough spare funds, you can get both, or if you're like me and you have the Kino and you can eventually get the Eureka version, that way you have both discs to have all of the extras and things. So that's why I'm going to hang on to the Kino version, because I do like the commentary, and that home movie footage is just priceless and amazing to see. So that's why I'm going to hang on to that version. But even if you have the Kino edition, at some point I think it would be a good idea to get a copy of the Eureka version, because it's a little bit better encoded, the artwork is beautiful, the booklet is really nicely done, and the supplements are exceptional, as are pretty much all of the extras involving these classic horror historians. So even if you have the Kino release, the Eureka is worth double dipping for, because the supplements are that good, and the overall package I think is significantly better. But if you do not have either of these releases and you're curious about this, the Eureka is the way to go, hands down, no contest. Particularly if you can hopefully get the limited edition slipcase somewhere with the absolutely gorgeous original artwork. So those are my thoughts on the Masters of Cinema Blu-ray release of the 1923 landmark super jewel, The Hunchback of Notre Dame, which not only is I think understandably called perhaps the first Universal horror film, or the major precursor to the Universal horror cycle starting in 1931, but it became a sort of film that Universal did sort of chase after for a while. The Phantom of the Opera was very much entirely designed as a follow-up to The Hunchback of Notre Dame, as a Lon Chaney star vehicle, right down to having a period setting in Paris. So you can very much tell that Phantom was built out of Hunchback, and you even have Norman Carey in the same type of role in both films. So one is very much significantly influenced by the other, and when RKO came to make their 1939 sound remake, of course, they were going to be heavily influenced by Universal's version, and they were, even though they did make their own new script and significant changes, they were still obviously going to be in the shadow of Universal's version, and that's really inescapable between the two. That's why they're so closely linked, I think, and remain the two best versions of the story yet filmed, and I don't think anything's really going to challenge that. So this remains a staggering, stunning restoration of a very compromised source for a film that we almost lost. So I cannot stress enough how amazing and important this is, and why it's a silent film release that needs to be in everyone's Blu-ray library. And particularly, it's all the more special seeing it now this year in 2023, because you have the ability to see a miraculous restoration of a 100-year-old film that has not dated or aged, and is just as effective as it was 100 years ago. So please do yourself a favor. Go and look at this miraculous 4K restoration on the Blu-ray release, which I think is best seen and has the best overall presentation and supplements package here on the Masters of Cinema release from Eureka. So as always, I hope my babblings on classic horror, silent films, and physical media releases has been at least somewhat fun and informative. If you've picked up either the Kino or Eureka releases, or if you're like me and you have both, I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. I do like the extras on the Kino, but I just think that the Eureka is obviously the overall better package, and of the two it's a no-brainer. That is the one to go for here on the Masters of Cinema release. And as I always say, please do keep supporting both boutique and studio labels by buying films on disc to help keep both physical media and film culture alive, and ensure that we can see more beautiful, miraculous silent film restorations like the beautiful, miraculous 4K restoration here of The Hunchback of Notre Dame. And as always, thank you ever so much for watching.